The following message is from GraceLife Church in Deltona, Florida. If you would like more information about GraceLife Church, or if you would like to hear more sermons from GraceLife, visit our website at www.gracelifeflorida.com.
This is the time in our service where we turn our attention to God's Word, and we're going to be in the book of Daniel. The book of Daniel in the Old Testament, the first couple of chapters, and there's so much Scripture that we're going to try to cover this morning. I didn't even ask Mike to try to include that on the back of the bulletin, so just find a copy of God's Word or get your iPhone out and get your ESV app out or whatever you have. I'm reading from the English Standard Version, and we're going to be again in the book of Daniel. It's one of the four major prophets in the Old Testament. If you have a hard time finding it, I think it's Isaiah, Jeremiah, Lamentations, Ezekiel, and then Daniel. Daniel, the book of Daniel. Right now, I'm just going to read the first chapter, and then I'll refer to chapter 2 when we start the message. So the book of Daniel, we're going to read chapter 1, the first 21 verses, so you can follow along with me. Daniel chapter 1. In the third year of the reign of Jehoiachin, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it. And the Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand with some of the vessels of the house of God. And he brought them to the land of Shinar, to the house of his God, and placed the vessels in the treasury of his God. Then the king commanded Ashpenaz, his chief eunuch, to bring some of the people of Israel, both of the royal family and of the nobility, youths without blemish, of good appearance, and skillful in all wisdom, endowed with knowledge, understanding, learning, and competent to stand in the king's palace, and to teach them the literature and the language of the Chaldeans. Verse 5. The king assigned them a daily portion of the food that the king ate, and of the wine that he drank. They were to be educated for 3 years, and at the end of that time they were to stand before the king. Verse 6. Among these were Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah of the tribe of Judah. And the chief of the eunuchs gave them names. Daniel he called Belteshazzar, Hananiah he called Shadrach, Mishael he called Meshach, and Azariah he called Abednego. Verse 8. But Daniel resolved that he would not defile himself with the king's food or with the wine that he drank. Therefore he asked the chief of the eunuchs to allow him not to defile himself. Verse 9. And God gave Daniel favor and compassion in the sight of the chief of the eunuchs. And the chief of the eunuchs said to Daniel, I fear my lord the king, who assigned your food and your drink. For why should he see that you were in worse condition than the youths who are of your own age? So you would endanger my head with the king. Then Daniel said to the steward, whom the chief of the eunuchs had assigned over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, test your servants for 10 days. Let us be given vegetables to eat and water to drink. Then let our appearance and the appearance of the youths who eat the king's food be observed by you, and deal with your servants according to what you see. So he listened to them in this matter and tested them for 10 days. At the end of 10 days, it was seen that they were better in appearance and fatter in flesh than all the youths who ate the king's food. So the steward took away their food and the wine they were to drink and gave them vegetables. Verse 17. As for these 4 youths, God gave them learning and skill in all literature and wisdom, and Daniel had understanding in all visions and dreams. At the end of the time, when the king had commanded that they should be brought in, the chief of the eunuchs brought them in before Nebuchadnezzar. And the king spoke with them, and among all of them none was found like Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Therefore they stood before the king. And in every matter of wisdom and understanding about which the king inquired of them, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and enchanters that were in all his kingdom. And Daniel was there until the first year of King Cyrus. I carry a heavy burden this morning, and I know my weaknesses as a
preacher. I know my limitations as a preacher, but my burden is this, that you have a clear understanding as to what your mission is as a Christian and as an American. I've been thinking about this a long time. I've been praying about it, and I know with the election less than 40 days away, it's probably on all of our minds to one degree or another, whether you love politics, whether you hate it, whether you're like one person said, every time I hear that word or see or hear anything politically related, I throw up in my mouth a little bit. I understand that's some of us. Some of this is nauseating, and we're just ready for it to be over, but God would have us to play a part in this. We're not just pacifists. We're not uninvolved in this nation that God has put us in. We're citizens of His kingdom, absolutely, but He has made us Americans for the time being. And we're less than 40 days away from electing our nation's next president. And people are discouraged, and people are angry, and people are afraid. And I will have to tell you, I can't remember a time when I've heard people talking about America in such cynical terms and hopeless terms. It's like Chicken Little, the sky is falling. I hear people use terms like Armageddon and children of light versus children of darkness and end of the world. And I'm thinking, I love my nation. I'm thankful for the freedoms that we have as Americans, but we're less than 5% of the global population. And we can't think in terms of Armageddon. If I don't want to discourage you, that if America tanks tomorrow, God will still be on His throne and the world will still revolve, and Christ will accomplish all His sovereign purposes. Amen? That's the truth. And maybe like some of you, I don't really have access to cable TV news, probably a good thing. But I do try to pick up some crosstalk when I'm driving around, going to and from the office and having appointments and making meetings. And I try to listen to some political news channel on the radio. And I think it may serve me better to just have somebody record some violent street cats fighting, just get the audio of that, and just put that in and play it instead. I think that may do my heart better, just to listen to that. It seems like that at times. Maybe you're in the same boat. But people seem right now to either be clenching their fist or wringing their hands. They're either very angry or they're very distraught and very worried, or they're rallying around this candidate or that candidate. So with every poll rise and fall, there's either pride or despair, and they're just living from one news pundit talking head declaration to the next. And I would say this, our country is definitely deeply divided. Wouldn't you agree with that? I mean, I don't think anybody in their right mind can disagree with that. And here's another theme that's emerged, at least for this election cycle. And it's this, that America is broken and needs to be fixed. Now, some of you may have seen the title of the message this week and thought, oh, great, that looks like a Donald Trump picture, and he's going to try to violate our conscience. Look, I can promise you, this is not a town hall meeting, okay? This is not a stump speech. This is a sermon. I just did that to try to get your attention, the title thing, right? I don't think any political candidate right now would disagree that they want to make America a better place and they want to make America great. They may question the again at the end. Some people don't think our nation has ever been great for them. But this is not a stump speech for either Hillary or for Donald Trump, okay? I don't feel like that's my place to tell you who to vote for. Think biblically about it, and pray about it and make an informed decision. And I'll leave it at that. But most people would agree that America is broken and it needs to be fixed, and there's a deep division that runs through us. Most of you would agree with that. And I think different people probably mean different things when they say our nation is broken. What do you mean exactly? And then, of course, people would mean different remedies when they say it needs to be fixed. Well, how in the world do you go about fixing this almost irreparable divide that we have? Some people think we're divided on these issues, and they're right: abortion, racism, same-sex marriage, terrorism, gun control, immigration, national debt, health care. And listen, we understand those issues. In some ways, we expect them. We know what the Bible tells us about our fallen nature. We grieve over them. But here's what's most concerning to me. Now listen carefully to me, because this is where I want to take this message. Here's what's the most concerning to me as a Christian, an American, and as a pastor. People are projecting so much expectation on either one man or one woman or some other elected political official as if they can fix all these issues and make our nation great again. That's an incredible burden to bear if you think about it for an elected official. Some people actually believe an elected leader can solve those problems. But you got to ask yourself, can broken people fix a broken nation? Because I think when we think of America, we think of an idea. maybe, or Washington, D.C., a city, but you have to think America consists of people, human beings that are fallen in Adam, and we hope to see them redeemed in Christ, but a broken nation means that there's broken people there. And presidents, I agree, they have a lot of power, they have a lot of authority, they can influence Congress, they can appoint justices, they can use their power to veto, they can grant presidential pardons, but I want to ask you a question. I want you to think with me. You may think, duh, but it's good to remind ourselves of these things. Can any elected official, do they actually have the power to drive out hatred from the human heart? Can they drive out hate-fueled acts of terrorism and racism? Can an elected official make lust just go away with a new law? Can you legislate honesty? Can you make rape and human sex trafficking disappear by your wisdom, by your politicking, in appointing the right person in the right place? Can you take that weight of responsibility and power on yourself? Can a president cure pedophilia, child abduction? Can he stop all the political corruption, make people honest? Can he eradicate greed and this lust for power and this hunger for just to be esteemed and just sinful, selfish ambition? No, it can't. Listen, if preachers can't cure those problems, I don't know what in their right mind makes people think that a president can. That's a pretty big burden to carry as an elected leader, don't you think? The weight of an entire nation riding on your shoulders. So should we bear some weight beyond who we mark on the ballot in November? That's really where I want to take this. Because when we think, make America great, we think of one person, and it's usually not us. Just like in the counseling room, right? When we counsel people, you have a couple, you have a conflict, and you ask this person, what's the matter? What's the problem? Who do they usually point to? It's never their own heart. It's always the other person. So this is where I'm headed. I know we all want to see national repentance. I know we all pray for a resurgence of Christianity in America. I join you in those things. We want to see it happen quickly. We want to see it happen on a large corporate scale, just like Jonah went into the city, the wicked Assyrian capital Nineveh, and he preached, and God converted the entire city, and we long to see that in America, not just in a city, but in our nation. We want to see a massive revival like that, and sometimes we fall into the trap of thinking that it's going to come from one single, solitary, broken elected official. But listen, that's not the way it works. It's not going to come from the top down. That's not the way that it happens. It's not going to happen in some kind of quick 4-year or 8-year presidential term or cycle. It's not going to come from one man's policies. It's going to begin with people like you and me that are filled with the Spirit of God, that are so gripped with the power of the gospel and so ready to pour out love on our fallen city and on our enemies that we rush out there and saturate our nation. That's where the true power is really going to come from. It's from God mediating his power through his people. That's the way it's always been. Small beginnings. We think large scale. I want to see it now, and I want to see it from the top down. But listen, the kingdom of heaven, Jesus said, is like leaven. Or it's like a mustard seed, the smallest seed to a Jew in the Old Testament and New Testament. It's like a mustard seed sown in a field, and yet when that mustard tree comes up, it's bigger than the whole garden, and everybody comes and finds shade in it. See, it starts out small. It's a very small beginning, and it's often a hidden influence. You don't initially see the incredible impact and the potential that you have. We don't see that. We're often blinded by that because we're always projecting our hope on other people, for other people to change. And that's why we're looking at the book of Daniel this morning. Because the Jews that had been exiled to Babylon probably feel the same way that a lot of us feel. Many of you feel betrayed by your political leaders. You feel cheated. You feel deserted and abandoned. You feel like you've been sold a bill of goods. You feel like you've been used. You struggle to come to grips with the fact that you now live in a nation where we, if you say Christians, we are no longer, if we ever were, in a moral majority. Christians don't have power in America. They don't. We're in a country that doesn't admire our faith, doesn't celebrate redemption the way that we do, doesn't want our input, doesn't like our church, doesn't welcome our convictions. And we think that this is the worst that it's ever been. We feel like somebody maybe stole our country right out from under us. You feel like that? You ever feel like that? You know, when I talk to older generations, I hear that a lot. What happened to my America? Dude, who took my country? And maybe you think that one party or the other is responsible, or that one leader or the other is responsible. And you get angry about it, and you feel like ranting or putting a big bumper sticker on the back of your car, or not voting, or doing something crazy when you do vote. And you miss the good old days. I hear that a lot. I preached a message here back in February on a really familiar portion of the Old Testament. It was in the book of Jeremiah, and it was in chapter 29, and it was a letter that God wrote to all the exiles and all the captives that had been drugged from their native country of Israel, all the way over under the reign of King Nebuchadnezzar, and had been culturized into that society. God wrote them a letter because many of them were confused, they were angry, they were in despair, they were hopeless. God had told them that they were going to be there 70 years through his prophets, but many of them were under the influence of false prophets who were telling them, look, pray against Babylon. Pray that God destroys this place. Pray that God burns this place to the ground. Don't even unpack your suitcases. Don't even get your clothes out and put them in the drawer. Because we're not going to be here very long. But God sent a letter to them. You may remember this. In Jeremiah, he wrote that letter and he said, look, build houses, plant gardens, get married, have kids, raise a family, pray for the peace of the city of Babylon, because in its peace, you'll find your peace. That was the letter that God sent to those captives. And here's what's interesting. Daniel read that letter as a teenager who was in Babylon. He read that letter, he took it to heart, he believed it, and he lived a really phenomenal life because of those promises that God made to him through that letter. He was an original member of the audience. Those are hard words for captives to hear. You know what? Pray for the city. Pray for these leaders. I know they're your enemy. I know that they've stolen your culture from you. They've taken you away from the values and the traditions and the art and the music and everything that you knew and everything that you were familiar with and everything that represented your religion. But he said, pray for them. Those were hard words for a captive, but they were true words, and Daniel took them to heart. He was part of that audience. And these people were just like us. They felt betrayed by their leaders, by the false prophets. You know King Zedekiah? He stayed back in Judah, and you know what? He never would agree to go and be a captive of King Nebuchadnezzar. You know what happened to him because of that? It's graphic in the Old Testament. God told him, I told you to submit to my providence, and you didn't. So you know what God let happen to King Zedekiah? He let him be taken captive to Babylon and judged by King Nebuchadnezzar. His two sons were slaughtered right in front of him, and then his eyes were put out, and he was put in a furnace and roasted. Terrible, isn't it? Because he was so stiff-necked and proud, he wouldn't agree to what God's will was, and that's what happened. So a lot of those people felt betrayed by their political leaders, and they felt betrayed by their spiritual leaders, and a lot of American Christians feel the same way. Feel like they're a shrinking group, they're threatened with extinction, they're in a strange, foreign, hostile culture that doesn't share their values, and they feel like outsiders, they feel like they've lost control. There was a lot of confusion, there was a lot of competing voices politically and religiously, and so some people said, just forget it. I'm just done. And I hear that kind of despair when I talk to people today, people in churches, people that ought to know better, that are wringing their hands, clenching their fists. Well, listen, here's what God wants us to do as Americans, okay? How can we make our nation great? This is what God says. He wants his people to sink themselves deep into the fabric of their city. God wants us, listen, to deeply engage. He wants you to deeply engage wherever you're at. But listen, he doesn't want you to lose your identity as a child of God. And he doesn't want you to lose your mission as a Christian either. See, there's that fine balance in the middle. Deeply engage. Don't lose your identity as a Christian. And don't lose your mission either. Don't lose your audience. So there's this fine balance that requires the gospel for us to carry out. It really does. You know, most of us either separate, like the false prophets. Here's the most interesting thing to me in this story. Do you know who the people were who were telling the Jews to separate from the culture, separate from the society, remove themselves, don't have any interaction, don't cultivate any relationships? You know who it was? It was prophets. False prophets, religious people were sending that message. And we've experienced that in our nation, haven't we? And then there were other people who were saying, you know what, just completely assimilate. Just become a Babylonian. For God's forsaken us, God's abandoned us. Party time, live it up. This city's got a lot to offer. So there was those two extremes. Either assimilate completely and lose your identity, or separate completely and lose your mission. And God says there's a third way. There's a better way. And it's to deeply engage, but to hold tightly onto the gospel. And that's the reason that I really wanted to take us to the book of Daniel, because you see that. See, when I preached last time in February, we just read that letter and tried to understand and unpack what that means for us. But I know, and God knows, we're visual learners. And so if you would ask yourself, okay, what does it look like to deeply engage, hold on to your identity, hold on to your mission, hold on to the gospel? What would that look like? And God shows us through the life of Daniel. He really does. And some of you may be thinking, okay, here we go. You guys are always talking about the gospel. You're always talking about that's the only place where we have power. And here you are, you're going to moralize this story like so many preachers do and say, look, dare to be Daniel, be just like Daniel. The moral of the story is be Daniel. No, listen, that is so far. In fact, I talked to my wife about that. I have prayed probably more than anything else this week before I preach this sermon that the takeaway is not, hey, look at Daniel, go and do likewise. I want to tell you something about Daniel. There were a lot of things in that letter in Jeremiah 29 that we didn't get to talk about in that last sermon. And one of those things was this. God said, I will be with you. I will be for you. I know the thoughts that I have towards you, says the Lord. They're thoughts of good, not of evil, plans of hope and restoration. Listen, Daniel took that. That's a gospel promise, Old Testament style. Daniel took that promise. He ironed it into his heart, and he went out clinging tenaciously to the gospel, and he impacted his city under one of the most pagan rulers that takes up more ink in the Old Testament because of his wickedness than any other man. Daniel took that gospel promise. So here's what I'm telling you. What you see in the life of Daniel is Daniel living out his theology. He is living out his theology, and here's what's so radical about this. Don't miss this. You're not going to believe this, but I promise you this is true. You know much more theology than Daniel would have ever hoped to know and understand. You believe that? You know the Bible says that Old Testament prophets like Daniel and others, they didn't even fully understand all the things that they were writing about. Did you know that? They knew there was a Messiah coming. They knew their hope was not in their own works. They knew that there was this sacrificial system that reminded them they were sinful, that sin requires death and sacrifice, and they needed atonement, and that God had promised to provide it through a man. That's about all they knew. Daniel had some extraordinary revelation and dreams and visions later on in the book. But listen, we have a much more clear understanding of what God's promise really meant because we're on the other side of the cross. So this is not a dare to be a Daniel. This is go beyond what Daniel, don't limit yourself to live the life of Daniel. Goodness, serious. I'm not saying that facetiously. So don't walk away from here saying I'm moralizing this. No, I'm telling you, this is an example of what you can do when you have the power of the gospel and you're unleashing it in your life and in your relationships, in your family, in your neighborhood, at your job. That's what this is really about. That's what this is really about. And this has always been God's plan. It's always been God's plan for us not to fully assimilate and for us to not fully separate, but to be a city on a hill, to be salt, to be light, to exude influence, to enrich, to be productive, to be creative, to be helpful, to be the best employee that you could possibly be if you're bagging groceries at Publix, or if you're taking orders at Chick-fil-A, to be the best possible employee you can be, or the best doctor, or the best surgeon, or the best artist, whatever it is. That's always been God's plan. Don't look to one person at the very top to change your nation. It starts with you. It does. And that puts responsibility on us, but look, it points us back to, look, we need power to do this. I cannot imagine trying to influence just one fallen relationship in my life without the promise and the power of God in Jesus Christ. Can't do it. Impossible. And neither could Daniel, and neither can you. That's God's plan. So what in the world is this Old Testament? That's a 20-minute introduction. How about that? So what in the world does this Old Testament passage have to do with this? This is the way I want to outline this, okay? This story in Daniel is going to address and obliterate 3 lies that we believe about our role in the world. 3 lies. We're going to take them and completely wad them up and stomp on them, okay? And these are hindrances to you and I making the nation that we live in, starting with our city and our neighborhood and our own family, great. However you define great, I define it as looking to God, looking to Christ, realizing our sinfulness, realizing our need for grace and forgiveness. So here's the first one. You ready for this? Here's the first one. You need a sacred calling. That's a myth. You have to have, in order to change a nation and to be influential and to make a lasting impact and point people to Christ, you have to have this quote-unquote sacred calling. You have to be a priest, or you have to be a pastor, or you have to be a full-time vocational missionary. So there's this dichotomy of there's sacred callings like that, and then there's secular pursuits. You know, if you're a pastor, it's a calling. Oh, did you hear? Tommy and Jeff were called into the ministry, and Susie over there just decided to be a teacher. Even the language we use betrays our false understanding of these things. I want to tell you something about Daniel. You may not know this, you may not believe this. Before Daniel was a prophet, did you know that Daniel was a politician? He doesn't even receive really any prophecies in the truest sense of the word until well after chapter 6. The first 6 chapters of this book is Daniel. In the first half of the first 6 chapters, he's a teenager. He is a stinking teenager, and he finds himself in a position where he's standing before the most powerful and wicked and corrupt king of the largest empire in the ancient world. He's a politician. He's not a prophet, never heard from God at all. Secular profession, secular calling. And yet there is where he is at. Did you know that? We think of Daniel, we think of this old-age prophet in a lion's den taming lions, right? Or receiving these incredible apocalyptic visions. And those things are certainly true, but the story that we're reading, Daniel was a politician, and yet he was used mightily by God. That's so encouraging when you think about it. One man wrote this, listen to this. People in our churches should be professors in local universities, researchers and physicians in our local hospitals, musicians in local bands, artists in local galleries, writers in local media, and politicians in local government. As we participate in culture, we can go from simply protesting all that is wrong in the city, we do that really good as Christians, to actually bringing righteousness to the city. We can go from being among the many who are recognized as problem finders in the city to being the ones who are recognized as problem solvers in the city. Daniel was a student and he was a politician. And listen, he was a politician who stayed loyal to his biblical convictions as a follower of Yahweh. And that's even more radical when you think about it, because he was pulled as a teenager out of the culture he was familiar with, out of the culture he grew up and was raised on, the art, the music, the religion, the anthropology, the cosmology. Am I saying that right, or is it cosmetology? One of them is makeup and the other one. Anyway, all the ologies, okay? It says here in chapter 1 that for 3 years he was trained, he and his 3 friends, in all the language and the literature of the Babylonians. Now that's just a comprehensive way to say that Daniel went to Babylon University, okay? And he went there. And you know what? He was a good student. Probably walked across the Babylonian stage, graduated summa cum laude. Probably top of his class. Probably recognized as one of the wisest, kindest, most gracious, most compassionate students. Did his homework, submitted it on time, never protested, never maligned any of his teachers. You know what? I'm sure he probably did some of that. He was a sinner. His sins aren't featured in this book. But do you get the idea? Daniel was probably one of the best students when he was being educated. Wasn't sending angry tweets, ranting on Facebook about how stupid this whole thing is. How could God do this? Why does he have to learn all this stuff that goes against his biblical convictions? Daniel wasn't one of those people. And you know what? If he would have been, I would submit to you, I don't think God would have used him. But he knew he was exactly where God wanted him to be. And God had called him, like he does us, to love our neighbor, to love our enemies, to heap coals of kindness on the head of those who persecute us. And so Daniel was being trained by the very people who had captured him and drug him into a foreign, hostile culture that hated his God, cared nothing for his religion, and only saw him as an instrument to help them. You know what? Daniel said, "Here I am. Your Majesty. Here I am to serve. Tell me what you need me to do, and I'm there. That was the attitude that Daniel had. He was a politician. He was a student. He was in a foreign, hostile land, a foreign, hostile culture. But he knew he was exactly where God wanted him to be. And listen, I hope you do too. I hope you know you are an ambassador for Christ no matter where you're at or what you're doing. You represent the high king of heaven. You don't have to be a preacher. You don't have to be a priest. You don't have to have an MDiv degree from a seminary to be used by God. In fact, I would say this. Those of you who don't, those of you, if you want to say secular sacred, you have much more access to unbelievers who desperately need to hear the gospel than I ever will. In fact, Jeff and I spend as little time in our office as we have to because we want to be out in the city with unbelievers. That means when we can have a meeting at a public place, we schedule it at a public place. I want to be out there. I don't want people to think I sit in an ivory tower at my desk and all I do is write sermons. Christianity is about relationships, and I want to cultivate relationships with as many unbelievers in my own family, in my own neighborhood, in my own city that I can. And you know what? It's still limited because I'm a pastor. You don't have some of those limitations. But if you're trusting in a person who has a sacred calling to do the gospel work, then we're missing an incredible opportunity. And I think so many people have bought into that myth and that lie for so long. When you hear that so loud and so often, it's hard to overturn it in one sermon. God used a politician. And you know what? He's used a lot of people just like that. Exodus 31, you probably don't recognize that chapter, but did you know that the first instance of a human being filled with the Spirit of God outside of God breathing life into Adam, do you know it's found in Exodus 31? And you may be shocked who the recipient of God's Holy Spirit was. Listen to this. The Lord said to Moses, "See, I have called by name Bezalel, the son of Uri, son of Ur, of the tribe of Judah, and I have filled him with the Spirit of God, with ability and intelligence, with knowledge and all craftsmanship, to devise artistic designs, to work in gold, silver, and bronze, and cutting stones for setting, and in carving wood, to work in every craft." You say, what? Yeah, he's a carpenter, filled with the Spirit of God. Does that encourage your heart, carpenters? It does mine. Because carpenters need to be filled with the Spirit of God too, because we've got an enormous task ahead of us with all the people that we're in a web and a relationship with that desperately need God and desperately need to hear the gospel and desperately need to encounter Christ. We need the Spirit of God, and we have it. He's filled us without restraint. Listen to these names. Johann Sebastian Bach. Anybody know who that is? A dedicated Christian who contributed to the world of music, a prolific composer. Isaac Newton, physicist and mathematician. He discovered the law of gravity. He didn't create it. And he invented calculus. I don't know if we want to thank him or slap him for that one. But got in the flesh for a minute, sorry. George Frederick Handel wrote the Messiah in just a matter of weeks. George Washington Carver, an African-American chemist. His parents were slaves, and he was awarded the Roosevelt Medal in 1939 for his research on peanuts. If you love peanut butter, praise God for that man, okay? William Wilberforce, he was a Christian who was used mightily by God in the House of Commons, a 20-year fight for his life for the abolition of slavery, and freed over 700,000 slaves. Now, none of these men were preachers. None of them were missionaries. William Penn, Christian, founder of Pennsylvania. He was known for treating the Indians with Christian charity and justice. Florence Nightingale, you doctors will know who that is. She's the one that saw all the doctors walking around with blood-smeared smocks and no latex gloves way back when. And she said, this might not be a good idea for you to operate on the next person with the other patient's blood all over you. And she revolutionized nursing care and improved conditions at hospital. Sanitization. Is that a word? Sanitization? Okay. Charles Dickens, Frederick Douglass, C.S. Lewis, some of those guys need no introduction, but none of them were preachers. And thank God, because if they would have been, the world would have been a worse place, because they left their mark. They were filled with the Spirit of God, and they knew their place. To beautify, to create something that would be helpful to society and leave an influence and have an impact on unbelievers. You know, you may not know this. I asked her permission to share it. There was a girl who's a missionary now, but before she was a missionary, she was just an employee at a toy store. I hope I get the story right. She was an employee at a toy store, and she was a brand new Christian, and she was just so consumed with zeal for the Lord and for holiness. And this is right about the time that all the Harry Potter phenomena came out, okay? And she saw that as one thing, magic, sorcery, no good. And she found herself in the position of an assistant manager at KB Toy Store. And she said, you know what, I'm not going to sell this product because I don't want to introduce children to witchcraft and to sorcery and black magic and all that kind of stuff. But she went to a church, and the pastor had announced that Sunday that he was going to preach on witchcraft and rebellion that week. And so she came with an open heart. She heard the sermon, and the sermon was basically from, I think it was 1 Samuel chapter 15, when the first king of Israel, King Saul, tried to play the role of a priest when he was only a king, and he did the sacrifice. And the prophet Samuel confronted him and said, because of your rebellion, this kingdom will be torn from you. Because rebellion is as the sin of witchcraft. You know that text, right? And she heard this pastor explaining that maybe a greater and more subtle sin than witchcraft and sorcery is when we rebel against our authorities. And she saw her place at that toy store, and she saw that her superiors had promoted her because she was a great employee, and she had good turnover on the products. She always sold the quota. And she was about to do something that was rebellious, that was unsanctioned. She was going to kind of secretly keep everything in the back and not sell it. And she told me, she said, my heart was penetrated, and I knew that I was the one that was being even more rebellious than whatever I thought that represented. I'm not going to get into the whole Harry Potter thing, okay? That's not part of this story, but hopefully you know where we stand on that. She's introduced a lot of kids to reading, right? Praise God. And so this young lady was telling me the story, and now did you know that she's a missionary in Ireland? It's Patty Parks. Did you know that about Patty? But listen, I tell that story to tell you this. Before Patty was ever a missionary, she was an employee at a toy store. She was an assistant manager. And I was the college pastor at Riverbend Church, and I lost count of all the people who came into my ministry, and I saw converted to Christ, and it was through her influence at her job. True story, guys. She would be probably embarrassed for me to tell you that, but I asked her permission if I wanted to share it with you. She was a faithful employee, and she was influencing the people who were under her and submitting to the people that were over her long before she got on an airplane and flew across the pond as a full-time missionary in Ireland. So if you view the whole secular versus the sacred, that's a false dichotomy. So Daniel was a teenager, he was a politician, he was a student, and God used him mightily. The gospel travels through an ordinary life. You may think your life is mundane, but listen, that's like metal to electricity. The gospel flows right through that life, a life of faith in Christ, and reaches all the people that you touch in your relationships. So that's one of the ways you make America great, is you dismiss this lie, this myth, that you have to be a pastor or a priest or a missionary. No, you're already a missionary no matter where you're at, what you're doing, you're an ambassador for Christ. Point 2. Man, I'm not going to get through all these. Point number 2, and I'm going to try. That you can engage people from a distance. That's the second myth, the second lie that we need to sweep out of the way. You want to make this nation great, you want to leave. We're always talking about leaving a small carbon footprint, but we don't talk about leaving a large gospel footprint. If you want to have a presence and a testimony for Christ, listen, you cannot engage people from a distance. You can't just start a Christian chat room and think you're going to turn the world upside down, right? Or I'll just write a blog, or I'll just go vote. No, listen, you got to draw close. You know what's interesting to me in this story? Several different times in chapter 1, you know what it says about Daniel? It says, and Daniel stood before the king. Daniel stood before the king. It's easy to pass over that when you read it, but think about what that represented. He's standing in front of the man that represented so much hurt, so much pain. This guy was straight up pagan. Straight up pagan. This is about as pagan of an individual that you're going to find in the Old Testament. Roasting kings from Israel. Probably, people speculate, Daniel was a eunuch. I don't know if I have to tell you what that means. It means he lost a lot more than his culture when he came to Babylon. Okay? They had ways of making sure you didn't steal their women. So Daniel's standing before the straight-up pagan king that represented such hostility, anger, hate, like a representative of Antichrist. And you think of Babylon, the very beginning of the Bible, there's the Tower of Babel that represented everything anti-God. The very end of the Bible, the mystery of Babylon, drunk with the blood of the martyrs. And then you have in the middle of the Bible the city, the actual city of Babylon. So this was a straight-up pagan place, and the straight-up most pagan ruler of that place. And Daniel has been trained for 3 years for one object, to serve this king and to help him be a good ruler. And Daniel did it. He stood before the king, and the king found him competent. He was one of the wisest people. He knew all about the culture of Babylon. He knew all about their religion. He knew all about their anthropology. He knew all about their method of charting the stars, their astrology, he knew all of those things. And he stood head and shoulders above all the rest. He got close. He drew near. This wasn't just something that was done from a distance. Daniel understood you had to engage. Russell Moore said this: a Christianity that is walled off from the culture around it is a Christianity that dies. It's a Christianity that dies. Daniel didn't ask, how can I give retribution to this king for what he did? He didn't ask that. You know what he asked? How can I pour out love in this situation? How can I serve those who are the most hostile against me? How can I love my neighbor? That's the question that Daniel was asking. And you see him answering that question here. I think that so often we rely on our culture. We rely on American culture to do the pre-work of evangelism that it would do in the 80s. Listen, in the 80s, you could go ask anybody who Jesus was and they could tell you. You could ask them about any of the stories, any of the parables. They knew about Daniel. They knew all those stories. But listen, we are not living in that kind of culture anymore. You can't just depend on the culture. You can't just assume that everyone understands the gospel. They don't. They're biblically illiterate. They're gospel illiterate. They're Jesus illiterate. They're Christianity illiterate. And unless you get close enough to them to explain to them what the message of Christianity is and how it impacts the way you make decisions, the way you treat your coworkers, your employers, the way you treat your wife, the way you treat your kids, they'll never know. Daniel was close. He engaged at a very close distance. People have no clue today what Christianity is or what a gospel-transformed person looks like. And listen, you may be the only person in their life that will ever be able to demonstrate that for them. But you got to get close. And it's scary, isn't it? Get close to your enemies, showing love to them. Makes us uncomfortable, makes us feel awkward a little bit. It's a lot better to just slap a bumper sticker on, right? And tell everything that's wrong with America and how you feel like your country's been stolen and you miss Reagan. It's a lot easier to just rant and say those things. One of my favorite covenants for a nonprofit organization says this. Listen, this is so good. Our Christian presence in the world is indispensable to evangelism. We affirm that Christ sends his redeemed people into the world as the Father sent him, and what this calls for is a similar deep and costly penetration of the world. We need to break out of our ecclesiastical ghettos and permeate non-Christian society. Isn't that good? Isn't that good? He's saying, don't seek and destroy your culture. Try and renew it. Seek to renew it. Stand against what's evil, like abortion and racism and injustice and inequality, and embrace what is righteous and what is redeemable. So those are the first two things. Those are the first two myths. And here's the last one. Here's the last myth. In order for the gospel to thrive and for Christianity to flourish, we have to have this peaceful, non-conflictive, non-confrontational existence in our nation, in our city, in our world. Okay? The gospel requires peace in order for it to flourish, and that's just a lie. That is a lie. That's where chapter 2 comes in. That's where chapter 2 comes in. You know what, guys? I'm going to make a call here. This is a very, very, very important point in this message. And I'm 40 minutes in, and there's no way I'm going to be able to make this point. And I haven't really talked to Jeff about this. I want to finish this. Would you guys let me do that? Can I finish this message next week? All right. Yeah, you're clapping because you want to get out of here, go to Cracker Barrel or something, aren't you? No, listen, this is a really good point, and really, this is where you're going to really see the gospel highlighted in the story. And I hate to kind of leave you hanging, But let's just stop there. Those are the first two lies that you have to get out of the way. We have to do away with this false dichotomy that there's some kind of secular calling and there's a sacred calling, and only the sacred people are going to be able to be useful to God and His kingdom. That was the first one. And the second one is that you can engage, but you can do it at a distance. You don't have to stand before the king. You don't have to get dirty. You don't have to be uncomfortable. You don't have to be awkward. You don't have to be around unbelievers. You don't have to hear people talking in a way that doesn't comport with your worldview. You don't have to ever let yourself be challenged. You know, that's hard. That's intimidating. Knowing that you could very well, in this relationship, in this environment, in this job, you can very well get into a conversation about your worldview and how it clashes with their worldview. Listen, don't run from that. That is so exciting. Even if you don't have the right answers, they're going to see hopefully you have grace and you have love and you have humility and you have patience with them in a way that the world doesn't know anything about. But you do. You can demonstrate those things. So those are the first two, and I'm going to make my last point next week. So, man, I hate to do that, but I'm going to do it, okay? Let's pray.